you have asked, why did we choose Tennessee as the very first place to visit? Is this where we want to end up in our retirement years? Maybe. So I've been studying this question of where to retire for a lot of years, probably 4 or 5 years. It even included Mexico. We went to San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, just north of Mexico City. It has a very large expat community, and we thought, it's got great temperatures. It's known as one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And we thought, cost of living is so low. So we went there for a couple of weeks. We lived in 3 different areas during that time period. And we looked at it very seriously. We looked at rentals. We did all sorts of things. We were trying to think, where can we really lower our cost of living? And Mexico, of course, is one of the first places that you think of to do that. But we didn't choose Mexico. So Mexico, although we loved the place, we loved the people, it just was too challenging. It was too challenging to be constantly going through immigration, to visit, to leave, to come and forth and go back and forth. It was too challenging as far as the language barriers. There were just many things that were just too challenging, even though the city is definitely a place that we want to go visit again. So then we started to focus more on the United States because we don't have those same traveling restrictions. We don't have those same language barriers. So how do I begin? There's many, many, many options. You go online and you Google best places in the United States to retire, and you're going to have a lot of different options. You're going to have a lot of different voices. So where do you begin? So I started with this. Are there any states that don't tax your retirement income, i.e. your Social Security, your pension, any retirement income? Well, lo and behold, there are some states that don't tax your retirement income. There are 8 of them. I want to get back to them in a second. But yes, there are 8 states that don't tax your income. Then the next factors I looked at, of those 8 states, what's the weather like? Of those 8 states, what's the cost of living generally? What's their hospital, their healthcare system like? Is it a decent healthcare system? Is the cost of living reasonable? What are the property taxes? What are the sales taxes? As you can see, this can get really complicated really fast. So I had to narrow it down to the things that were most important to me. So the things that were most important to me were the taxes, the weather, and I'll tell you in a second. Okay, so we'll get back to the third most important thing in a second, but I want to go back to the 8 states. Let's review the 8 states that, again, focusing on the taxes, both the income taxes, the property taxes, and the sales tax. So let's take a look at those 8 states. First state, Alaska. Let's look at their property taxes. I'm going to review my notes here. So the property taxes, the average property taxes, I'm giving an average for all of these things based on U.S. News' report in 2023, okay? So Alaska's property taxes were $2,422, and they have no sales tax or state tax. Interesting. So the property taxes are actually kind of high, but they don't have high sales tax. They have no sales tax. So that's interesting. But then we go to my second most important thing, weather. I think you know my answer to that. Unless you want to go hunting bear and you really like fishing, Alaska is not a state for me. Okay, let's look at number 2. Number 2 is Florida. Florida has $1,773 as an average for their property taxes, significantly less than Alaska. And their taxes are at 7% for their sales tax. That's really good. Awesome. Let's look at the weather. Well, I don't do well in humidity. I don't know about a lot of people do. I do love the beaches. I have a family member that's there. Could be a lot of draw. But I can't take a wall of humidity when I walk out the door. I just can't. My makeup just all runs off. It's not a pretty sight. Let's look at number 3. Number 3, Nevada. $1,749 is the average for their property taxes, and their sales tax is 8.25. Okay. Less property taxes than Florida or Alaska. Nevada, might be a contender. Let's go back to that. Let's put a question mark there. South Dakota, now that's interesting. $1,620 is the average property tax, and their sales tax is only 6.11. Wow, impressive. And I gotta say, Kristi Noem as their governor is absolutely fascinating, powerful, inspiring governor there. And I find South Dakota interesting. And I've looked at it very seriously. But the weather still keeps a question mark there. I don't know if I can tolerate the weather. Maybe it's just a spring, summer, fall destination. South Dakota might be a place to go look. Then ranking number 5, I guess these aren't really ranking numbers, they're just a list. So number 5 is Tennessee. Tennessee's average property taxes is $933. Wow. I mean, they are significantly less than all the other states. But now their sales tax ranks up there at 9.55. It's reminiscent of us here in California. So it's pretty high sales tax. It must be how they make up some of their revenue that they lose through the property taxes. But I could also pop up to other bordering states, because Tennessee is surrounded by so many states, and maybe take advantage of some really good no taxes or lower taxes in some of those other states. So Tennessee is very interesting. Now let's look at the weather. The weather in Tennessee, it varies throughout the state. The west side has a little more humidity. The south portion down by Georgia has a little bit more humidity. There's more tornadoes that kind of come up through the western side of Tennessee. But we're interested in the northeast portion of Tennessee. And they have a climate that actually is very similar to our climate here in Lodi, California, which is Northern California. So they have a very interesting climate, and we visited that portion of the state last year, and we loved the beauty of that state and that area. So that is ranking really high because of the low property taxes. The weather was very comfortable. So check. Okay, let's look at number 6, which is Texas, another state that we considered very seriously, especially because most of our family is in Texas. My side of the family and my husband's side of the family. We have a lot of family members there. And let's look at their average property taxes. You're going to be surprised. At $2,275 is their average property taxes in comparison to, say, Tennessee that I just spoke of at $933. That's very high. Something else too that is interesting about Texas, and I think this is also true of Florida, is their homeowners insurance is also much higher than a lot of other states, and right now higher than us here in California. In Texas, sales tax is 8.2%. So even though they don't tax your income, no matter what your income is, whether you're retired or not, they get you on the property tax and on the sales tax. And the prices have really been climbing in Texas. And so it got to the point where it just got so expensive that we couldn't afford the property taxes that we might have been able to afford maybe 4 or 5 years ago, because the houses maybe were averaging at $250,000. But now they're way up in the $400,000 or $500,000 range. And so property taxes on that level of the price of a house is just too high. So let's look at the weather in Texas. Well, I lived in Texas for many years. My kids were born there. I know a lot about the weather in Texas. It can get pretty darn hot. Yeah, it can get pretty darn hot. There's a lot of benefits to living in Texas, and there's a lot of state pride. But the downside is to me the lack of comfortable weather. Like at night, it stays really, really, really hot. So if it's 90 degrees during the day, which it often is 90 degrees at night, it never seems to cool down during that phase of heat. And then they get really bad hailstorms, That's why a lot of times their homeowners insurance is so high, is because of the storms that they get. So the reality is we were just priced out of the Texas market, even though we kind of wanted to be by our family. We were just priced out of that market. Let's look at number 7, Washington. So the average price of property taxes is $2,631, and their sales tax is 9.8. So not only are they the highest in property taxes and the highest in sales tax, they also don't have weather that I'm really interested in. So it didn't take me long to go no to Washington State. Sorry, Washington. Final one, Wyoming. A lot of people have found themselves interested in Wyoming. Their property taxes are $1,058. That's very low. That's second onto Tennessee. And their sales taxes are only 5.44. So their property taxes and sales taxes are very low, making Wyoming very interesting. Except for, you figured it, the weather. I don't know about you, but Wyoming weather, not so much. And I don't know anybody in Wyoming, and I've never visited it. So it might be interesting to visit Wyoming. It might be interesting to visit South Dakota, because they both had really good figures there. But I don't know enough about the state to really consider the weather. But as one who grew up in Wisconsin, my guess is the Wyoming and the South Dakota weather is similar, maybe even worse, and that might check it off the list. Okay, so let's round back to the third most important thing. We had the taxes, and then we had the weather. The third most important thing to us is the location of any given area. Did it have access to an airport and hospitals? So did it have access to an airport and hospitals? And I really wanted to be within 15 minutes. Right now we're about 45 minutes from an airport. Makes it a little challenging. 15 minutes would be great. What about 15 minutes to a hospital? So that was the third most important thing, was the location. Once you narrow it down to a state, can you then also find hospital and airport in the same? You'd be surprised how hard that is to combine all of those things. And then lastly, one thing that might be tipping us in the scale towards choosing Tennessee as the first place we visit as a potential place to retire is we have a friend inviting us there. So isn't that great if you've got a connection to someone? And we actually have several people that have moved from our state in California and from our church, and that have landed in various parts of Tennessee. So that's really kind of cool that, you know, if you're acclimating to a new area, but you have some connections that they can help you find people, they can help you find a church, they can help you find repairmen, all that kind of stuff, somebody to go out to dinner with. It's a challenge to leave the state that you've been in since 1987. Your children and your grandchildren are there, your friends are there, your church is there, your whole life has been there. How do you make this change? It's really a big deal. So this is all very kind of looking at things from a very logical standpoint, but there's also the heart to look at, which changes a lot of things. So I would encourage you to listen to some future videos and you might find out more about that.